All right. Hey, everyone. Welcome to Softcast. This is your host, Sergeant Major Matt Parrish, and we are excited once again to have a phenomenal guest. One of my favorite things about this show is the ability to talk to different people from across our enterprise. We've just got an embarrassment of riches when it comes to human capital. And today we've got another phenomenal guest, a former 18 Echo from 7 Special Forces Group, Zack Garner. Zack, how you doing today, man?
Doing well. Appreciate you guys having me on here.
No, excited to talk to you, man. Let's start from the beginning. Tell me kind of what makes you want to go serve, period, but specifically what makes you want to go to SOF, what makes you want to go to Special Forces?
Absolutely. So I grew up in Indiana, Midwest boy, my entire childhood, graduated from high school, 18, without a plan. I realized I wanted out of Indiana. That was the story of why I joined the Army. I wish I had more to say, but that was at 18 years old. That was the driving cause behind my purpose in serving the military. Once I got in, it ended up being something that I really enjoyed. I had structure in my life. I had routine. I had started making really good friends. I deployed pretty much straight out of basic training, reported to my first duty station, was there for about a month, and then found myself in Iraq. And then over time, just, when you surround yourself by the right people, you feed off of them. And I had good NCOs, good leadership. So they pushed me to be the best that I could. And I started, because I showed that, I got specialty schools. And, when you get encouragement in that form, it makes you want to keep doing more and more. And so that eventually led to me going and taking the steps to go to selection, getting selected, and then turning out to be an 18 Echo speaking Pashto in 7th Group. Which, yeah.
So if you're listening from outside of the SF world, 7 Special Forces Group, my home group as well, area of responsibility, Central and South America. However, during the height of the global war on terrorism, when we were rotating into Afghanistan very frequently, there's a batch of new Green Berets who got Pashto, which is a language from Afghanistan, as opposed to getting Spanish, because at that point you were much more likely to use Pashto rotating into Afghanistan than you were doing our area of responsibility and doing Spanish or Portuguese. So that's why we both kind of chuckle, as I had a few of those guys on my team as a team sergeant as well, Zack, who, then I figure out, all right, how do I get you Spanish as well? Because as you know, as a 7th grouper, we never turned our back on our area of responsibility. We just did and both. So I guess I want to ask, before we get into your time in 7th Group, did you want to be an Echo? Did you want to be a communications guy? Is that something that you put at the top of your list? Or was that something that they said, hey, you know what, Zack Garner, have we got a job for you? You're going to be an 18 Echo.
Yeah, absolutely. I finished through selection, and at that final meeting, they're like, okay, this is your language, and then they said you can be an Echo or a Delta, so Commo or medic. And the medic side intrigued me more, but I knew the course was going to be, it was going to tack on like an extra 6 months. So I was just ready to get to work, and so I took Echo, and I won't lie, I struggled through that course trying to understand all the theories and everything behind it. And honestly, now I've completely dumped all of it. So if anyone's listening and has radio questions, I got some awesome friends I can point you in the direction of, but I'm not the guy to talk to.
I get it, man. Yeah, that's everybody talks about the academic rigor of the Delta course, but the Echo course is no joke either. There's a lot of theory and things going on over there. I have obviously a bunch of friends who were going through the Q course or were later my Echoes, who we used to joke, as I was an 18 Charlie, an engineer. At the time, the Echo course and the Charlie course kind of shared a hallway, and we would end up on breaks together. And I remember when I was in the Q course, the Echo course across the hall, their class motto was "should have been a Charlie," because they said as we came out, we all had smiles. And we were enjoying, even though there's academically, somewhat difficult things, landmines and explosievs, and
which is a lot more fun than radio.
But that's a lot more fun. Yeah, exactly. So their class motto was "should have been a Charlie." So I never regretted being an engineer at the time. So all right, so we get into 7th Group. You go to the best group in the world.
Absolutely.
Special Forces Group. talk me through kind of your experience as you have now become a Green Beret. You have combat experience already from the conventional military, but now, hey, I've assessed, I've been selected, I've gone through this, year and a half of the qualification course. I'm finally a brand new Green Beret, new guy walking into my team in 7th Group. What was your experience there?
It was interesting. I think it was a little bit different than the standard experience. And I say that because I joined when the 4th battalions were just standing up.
Yeah.
And on top of that, 7th Group was still in the process of moving from Fort Bragg to Florida.
Yeah.
So it was kind of a weird environment at the time. And I got there and I was signing into Group S1, and I was an E6 at the time. And as I was signing in, they had just gotten a call that CJSOTF staff needed an 18 Echo to come over there and be PSD for the CJSOTF command.
Yeah.
So they're like, "Oh, we got the guy in here right now." And so
Hey,
just like when I was
we got a job for you.
just like when I was a private and I showed up and went to Iraq the first time, it was the same way with 7th Group. Like 6 weeks later, I was on a plane going to Afghanistan, and had been assigned to the mountain team at that point. So the whole mountain team went over, and we were on that BDOC mission. Yeah. But I was like, it was actually like, I kind of, everybody else was dreading it. It ended up being an awesome opportunity for me, because when they took PSD out, it was just me. The BDOC was on standby in case we got in trouble. So I got to just hang out with the commander and the sergeant major group. And, when you're traveling with them 4 or 5 days a week and overnights and random locations, you start to establish some rapport. And I had a really good working relationship with them. And that kind of set me up for when I got back to Eglin at the end of that trip, and also with that trip, it was awesome because I would go work for them basically like Monday through Thursday, and then Friday through Sunday was like, if I made my own schedule. I'd work out. I had my own range. If I wanted to go take flights and go to other teams and give one of their dudes a day off, I had free reign of the entire area. So I could just go out to VSO sites and hop on a patrol mission and have some fun, and then fly back and go back to work on Monday. So it ended up being awesome. I learned a ton on that trip. I got to pick their brains. And then when I came back, they were like, whatever school you want to go to, we got you. And so as a new Green Beret, I mean, I feel like a lot of guys want to go to like dive school or Halo school. For me, it was Sephardic. Yes. So I went to Sephardic, and then came back and got moved to the dive team from that mountain team. The whole reason I was put on the mountain team was to go help with that mission, because I was a senior Echo and they needed somebody over, even though I was actually a new Echo in their eyes. I was a senior Echo. And so, yeah, I came back, got assigned over to the dive team, and went back to Afghanistan with them and had a standard VSO deployment doing village stabilization operations. And yeah, then that ended, and that my career as a Green Beret started to end. I started getting med boarded at that point. So my time in 7th Group was really only like 3.5 years.
Yeah, two combat deployments in different environments, which is cool. One of the things that I think is cool about Special Forces and SOF in general is it's not monolithic. Like you're not signing up and you're just going to get like one view of things. Through my years on a team, different combat rotations, either Central and South America and other places, there's always a different spin. There's always something that's sort of, interesting and new, and you don't feel like you're just, even as you're going back to Afghanistan or Iraq at the time, usually there was a different mission, different location, different things. So it's an interesting career field in that you're not stagnant, right? So you got to do protective security detail for the commander and the sergeant major on one. Then you go back over to village stability operations, where you're really embedded into a local village and not in the traditional, like, hey, we live on this big base and all of the Afghans are out there. You're right in the middle of it. Walk us through towards the end of that as you start having issues where now suddenly you're going to get medically discharged. How did that come about? Like, what was the deal?
So I had some previous TBIs in my medical files, but I never really had any long-term effects from them. They were just documented in there. And then in September of 2013, I we were out on a 4-day op, basically just sleeping outside of our trucks every night, just setting up little overnight sites and having security up. And then the last thing I remember, I made the guard roster for all of our uplift force and everybody for the night. Everybody knew where they needed to be, what time they needed to be up. I was now getting ready to bed down myself, and I had my rucksack up on top of an RG-33, which, what do you say? Like it's probably what, 12, 15 feet off the ground.
Yeah, massive vehicle. If you're not tracking, it was like a Bigfoot truck almost. I'm trying to think if I have never seen one, how I would describe it. But massive vehicle.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's like a school bus with
yeah,
like a 15-inch lift and
yeah,
44-inch tires on it.
yeah. That sounds
So
about right.
I needed to get up on top of that truck, get in my rucksack, and change my socks and t-shirt because I was starting to stink pretty bad. And and then I was going to go to sleep. And that was the last thing I remember. And the next thing I know, I was getting loaded onto this truck or onto this helicopter, and I was like, "What happened?"
Yeah.
And they told me, "I don't know. We found you on the side of the truck having a seizure."
Hmm.
And I thought that I might have fallen off that truck. My head was hurting like crazy. I don't know if that's normal with seizures,
Yeah.
but my head was killing me. And they flew me back to Kandahar. They did a workup. Basically, the doc said, "Hey, if we report this as a seizure, it's going to be a career ender for you.
Yeah.
We're going to take a chance and hope that maybe this is just dehydration. You passed out, whatever." Nobody knew if I fell off that truck or if I seized before I started seizing on the ground. What happened was they just walked over and I was laying there shaking, doing the kicking chicken, if you will.
Yeah.
And our dog was barking. We had a bomb dog out with us. He's the one that actually alerted everybody.
Hmm.
And I don't want to mention any names, but a current battalion sergeant major at 7th Group, who was my senior 18 Bravo on my team at the time, was like, "Zach's just playing jokes with the dog." And he just left me there, which I can't I can't blame him because I did play a lot of jokes. So
Yeah.
I kind of set myself up for that one. But then our medic came over and he was like, "Yo, he's not playing around."
Yeah.
And so I finally stopped seizing. They get me to Kandahar. They tell me, "Hey, we're not going to call this a seizure. We're going to call it dehydration, sleep deprivation, whatever, and hope it doesn't happen again."
Yeah.
I ended up finishing out that deployment and coming back to Florida. And it wasn't until probably 3, 4 weeks after we got back, I had another one at home. And this time my wife saw it. We ended up going to the hospital. They got me a neurology appointment. They did a brain scan and they said, "Hey, you have epilepsy. You constantly have this epileptic brain pattern going
Yeah.
on." And they started me on some medications and told me, "Hey, if you go 2 years without a seizure, you can go back to your job. So we'll move you to a desk for 2 years. If you go 2 years, you can be back on the team."
Hmm.
At that point, we couldn't figure out what medication was going to work. The first one didn't work, so they upped the dose. Then they add another one to it. Meanwhile, I'm still having seizures, and every time I have one, that 2-year clock gets reset.
Sure. Yeah.
So it eventually just got to the point where it was like, I don't know that I'm ever going to go back to a team, and I don't want to sit up at group headquarters forever. It's just not for everyone, myself specifically.
Yeah.
And so they had started the med board process, and I would have had the chance to appeal it, but at that point, I was just ready to move on, like accept it and figure out what the next steps were. I was 31 years old, had a family to support, and
Yeah.
just ready to go.
Yeah. I think, I was having a conversation with another one of our guests recently, and it was kind of centered around this whole idea of resilience and all these things. And what's so critical that I think sometimes we we maybe overlook is it's incredibly tough to try to come back from something like that. Like your purpose was kind of stripped away, right? Like what you thought your purpose was at that point is pulled from you without your control. You know, it's not like, you know, hey, I made a mistake and now I'm getting booted or whatever. Like, no, this is just randomly all of a sudden I have epilepsy. I'm starting to have these seizures, all these things. Getting that next goal to, you know, kind of set your sights on that next purpose is so critical to trying to be resilient and move in the next direction. I know when you come out of that, I know maybe it wasn't the first thing in your mind, but I know eventually you get to the point where you're like, okay, hey, I'm going to get a goal. I'm going to take a big swing. And that was riding a bike across the US, right? So talk me through, like, how did that come into your mind? How did that come into your circle? Like, okay, hey, that's going to be my focus of where I'm going to push it.
Yeah, I agree with you 100% that finding that purpose is key to resilience. I've actually started making a list of things that help me become more resilient, because
Yeah.
when resilience really matters is when something unexpected happens.
Yeah.
So you got to prepare for that. And finding a purpose was huge. It came to me pretty quickly. I moved originally as soon as I got out and was finally discharged from 7th group. I moved up to Minnesota. I'd always been a big cyclist. Cycling was always like an outlet for me to just, I would come home from work, rough day in the team room, whatever, and just go crank out 30 miles and
Yeah.
just, you know, just it helped. And I started to identify about 6 months after I left the Army that there was a huge push of pharmaceutical medication
Mm.
on me, and I didn't really agree with that. And so I wanted to kind of raise some awareness and start getting some people talking about non-pharmaceutical treatments for traumatic brain injuries. And I reached out to Task Force Dagger, and they said, hey, we'd love to work with you. And so I came up with this idea to ride a bicycle through each one of the active duty special forces groups across the US.
Yeah.
So we started up in Washington and worked our way all the way to Florida. And it was great. We had fundraisers along the way. I had, you know, people in every town coming out to ride with me for portions of it because we documented it all on social media. And it was an amazing experience. It gave me a purpose again, and it eventually it led to my next career. And I just met some awesome people along the way. I just recently was up in the Northwest and drove this time, but part of the route that I rode, and I stopped at places where people really went above and beyond to open their doors to me and my friend Adam that did it with me.
Yeah.
And I just stopped, and I was like, these people might not even remember me, but I'm going to go in and thank them because they changed how I view people in the world, you know. And it was awesome. I went in and they did. There was one guy that was a former Vietnam era 7th grouper,
Wow.
and he owned this gas station, and I stopped in that gas station to get water, and he realized what I was doing, and he pulls out his photo album and starts showing me pictures of him in Vietnam. And then he bought me a hotel room for the night, and
Oh, that's
I
awesome.
ended up drinking beer with him way too late. And yeah, but I stopped in there, and he didn't own the gas station anymore, but the guy that was there said, hey, he just lives around the corner. And I said, do you think he'll care if I stop by his house? And I went in there, and he was in the driveway drinking. And I got out of my truck, and this is middle of nowhere, Montana. And he's like, who is pulling down my driveway? And he gets up, probably to grab like a shotgun. And I get out of the truck, and I was like, hey, sir, I don't know if you remember me. And he stops me, and he just signals for me to follow him, and he takes me into his garage, and on his toolbox he still has one of our stickers that we gave him
Yeah.
posted on his toolbox. And it was cool to see that I had an impact on people as well, and it was awesome to go back and reconnect with them. And yeah, it ended up leading to a job coaching triathletes, becoming an endurance coach and working with triathletes after that.
As you found that next like purpose, right? You know, I know, um, especially in that case where you have worked so hard to become a Green Beret, and now you're finally living out what you feel like is your purpose. You feel like it's pulled away. Now I'm on that new purpose. How did you feel as you're riding across? I mean, that's not some little thing of like, hey, I'm gonna, you know, whatever, I'm gonna run 10 miles or something. You're riding across America on a bicycle. Like, did you? Was it cathartic as you went along, or was it so detail and mission focused that it, you know, it didn't really become cathartic until afterwards? Like, what was your mindset as you're pedaling, you know, over the mountains, over the plains? You're kind of doing the Forrest Gump thing, but on a
Yeah.
bike, you know?
Yeah.
And a really important part of this question: did you have this righteous mustache then, or is this a later addition? Because if you're watching on YouTube right now, I know you're wondering the same question. If you're listening, you're missing out on a really righteous mustache. But anyway, back to you, Zach.
Yeah. So the mustache it's gone through many waves. I think during that point there was also a beard attached
Okay.
to
All
it.
right.
But yeah, the mustache has probably lived longer. The beard gets hot in summertime, and then I just have people that tell me I've got a great mustache, so why would I stop rocking it? You know?
Yeah,
So
it will be a definite feature in the YouTube version of this. But okay, back to the real. As you're bicycling across America, I mean, it's got to be, first of all, it's super cool that you got that connection with people, but also, I mean,
mhm.
there's so much natural splendor that we're blessed with in our country. You're seeing it from bike. Like, was it cathartic to you then, or were you just so detail mission focused? You know,
I did a good job of balancing it, and
yeah, good for you. Yeah,
you're absolutely right about how beautiful this country is. That was the first time I'd ever seen the Rocky Mountains.
yeah,
And
a good way to say
so
it.
yeah, so day one I started up in Anacortes, Washington. Well, we had an event at Lewis, and then we drove up to Anacortes because I wanted to start like on the most northwest point and like put my feet in the water while holding onto my bike and get that
Yeah,
picture, you know, starting on the west coast. So I started, and the first day is beautiful because you're surrounded by, it's pretty flat at
yeah,
first because you're at sea level, but there's all these mountains in eyesight.
yeah.
But then day two, man, it was like 60 miles up this mountain pass, and it took like 9 hours to get to the top. And I will say, day two, I started to question if I was going to make it to day 90. And
Yeah.
but I got up to the top right as the sun was starting to set. And then I rode down the backside of the mountain, which was 35 miles and only took like 35 minutes.
Yeah.
And it made it all worth it. Like, you know, it's the same as going back to selection or phases of the Q course where you're like, this sucks. I'm not having fun. This was a mistake to do this. But then you get some hot shower, you get a shower and a couple hours of sleep, and you're like, all right, I can do this again. You know, it brought me back to that feeling. And I will say there were a couple states that weren't as fun as others to ride through, but for the most part, that was one of the defining times that I realized why what my service meant to me, if that
Wow.
makes sense, because I really appreciated this country and that was, you know, just everything, the scenery around me to the people I met. That was when, like I said, I didn't join the army for those reasons initially. It was my ticket out of Indiana,
Yeah.
but the people throughout my service and then that moment is what really defined why I care about this so much.
Yeah, it's phenomenal. And you know, we talk about resilience. You know, we talked about it a little bit already today, but we talk about it in a lot of different ways on this show with different people. And, you know, you now have set yourself in this really high, lofty goal that you end up achieving. You bike all the way across the U.S., no small feat whatsoever. You've accomplished that. You've shown resilience coming out of getting medically discharged. And it's like, all right, hey, Zach's shown resilience. He's a great podcast guest. All right, wrap it up. All right, any final words? But that's not even the beginning of sort of your story of having this was foundational to the resilience you later show, unfortunately, as a result of an accident while training up for an Ironman, right? So as you become a coach and you find your purpose there, you start also competing, and then unfortunately get in an accident. Talk to me about, you know, sort of that process and what happened, unfortunately, that really put your resilience to the test.
Sure. So I came back from that ride and I was kind of back at, okay, what's next? Like,
Sure.
it was a weird feeling because it was such a high for 3 months being on that ride and getting to experience that then when it ends, there's a huge crash.
Sure.
And luckily it was very shortly lived. I think like a week later, I was back at the gym that I went to in Minneapolis, and the owner comes up and says, hey, we're expanding our gym and putting in an endurance training facility, and I want to pick your brain. And he was like, if you were going to use this place to train, what would you want here? And then he went and did exactly that. So he basically built my dream gym for me. And
that's pretty awesome.
And then he was like, cool, now I need you to come coach here. And you know, I'd done CrossFit for years. It was a CrossFit gym that now had an endurance component to it. I'd done CrossFit for years, and I had cycled a lot, obviously, and I had no clue how to be a coach, though. And so he was like, look, you have the personality, you have the story, the background. People respect that. We'll teach you how to coach. And they took me on. And so I started coaching, and I had the majority of my cycling athletes were triathletes.
Sure.
And I wanted to know psychologically what that's like for them, because I know what biking is like, but I don't know what it's like after you swam a couple miles and then you have to go run a marathon after you ride 114 miles.
Right.
So I was like, I need to know what this is like for them. So I started training and was doing a half Ironman in Minnesota, and coming into an intersection, there was a lot of negligence that went on. It was bad weather, and I think that deterred them from doing a lot of things like putting up signs where you're supposed to turn, or, you know, police being in the intersection controlling traffic.
Yeah.
So I came into this intersection and a car came at the same time, and we became friends pretty quick. And it's crazy because I remember it all really clearly. I realized that as I was approaching that intersection that I was supposed to turn there, but at this point the ground was wet, and if I had hit the brakes and tried to turn, I probably would have slid in and been on the ground and had a car go over me. Yeah. So I was like, I'm just going to try to shoot through and see if I can avoid anything, and I failed miserably. And
you found a car, though.
Yeah, I found a car, and I remember like the second before I made peace with, I'm going to hit this car.
Yeah.
And I tried to like shift my body so to minimize the effects of the impact. And I did a pretty good job at that, because I remember going over the handlebars and bouncing off the windshield of the car and thinking that wasn't so bad. I even had enough time to think, if my bike's okay, I might be able to finish this thing still, because I was in third place and I was wanting to catch first and second. And so I saw the ground in the sky, though, for like the fifth or sixth time. And I was like, I think I'm pretty high off the ground right now. I told myself just to go limp. And this all happened within like, 3 seconds.
Fractions of
But
seconds. Yeah, absolutely.
yeah, but it felt like I had like plenty of time to think about it. And I just told myself, just go limp, don't try to catch yourself. And then it was lights out once I hit the ground.
Yeah.
And I woke up on a backboard, getting loaded into an ambulance. This time, when I woke up, I had an idea of what happened versus before when this helicopter's just landing on my face. And yeah, I got into the hospital. The big concern was I had a really bad concussion, and when I landed basically like the side of my face on the ground, and then my back like scorpion backwards and bent the
Yeah.
way it's not supposed to bend.
Hmm.
So they were doing a full back workup and everything, and then I developed compartment syndrome in my right leg, which is where you have a ton of trauma. It swells and swells and swells. Eventually, the fascia that surrounds the muscle cuts off circulation, and they then have to manually, surgically open it up and drain all the fluid out of there. So, went into emergency surgery later that night, and I woke up from surgery. Surgery was like 8 hours. I woke up and I had this huge, like 24-inch long hole in my leg
Wow.
and just left open. And
What are you thinking when you wake up and you see that? I mean, obviously you're a guy who's already seen it, you've had a ton of opportunities to show resilience, we'll say, but there's not much that prepares you for waking up and seeing this massive 2-foot hole in your leg. Like, what goes through your mind? What are you feeling at that point?
at that point, I think I was so heavily
Sure.
medicated that
Yeah.
I was like,
That's probably a good thing. Yeah. All right.
yeah,
Well, when the gravity of the situation does hit you,
yeah.
what's in your mind? Are you immediately thinking I'm going to be back on a bike? Are you thinking about that next mission? For a lot of us, I mean, I've woken up from some of those things before where, hey, you got a day or maybe a week or in some cases longer where you haven't found that next purpose yet, and there's some dark days. I know you
At that
ultimately go through a long period of recovery. I'm just curious when it starts sinking in, how you feeling?
at that point, I think I was determined. I was like, I'll get back where I'll come back stronger than I was, and I didn't. I didn't sit still for very long. Even while I was still in the hospital, I would get up with a walker and start moving around the hallways. And I just don't sit still well. And, like I said, cycling was an outlet for me, and cycling was out for that period, but I could still walk, and I needed something to do. I can't just lay in bed all day. And so I started walking, and then, once I got released from the hospital, I got home, we started doing walks around the neighborhood, and it was probably only a month afterwards. I was like, after I had like the staples and everything removed and everything was closed up, I would get out on my bicycle and I wasn't going on like, training rides, but I would just get on like a little cruiser bike and go pedal around the lakes just to clear my head and get back out there. And so I was really determined to come back stronger and show them like, hey, this isn't going to affect me. um, the biggest thing was the mental piece of it. So about a year later, I signed up for a 100-mile bike race in Chattanooga, Tennessee, and went out. I finished it, but I was so paranoid the whole time
Yeah.
that I couldn't be competitive. I was so scared riding close to other riders.
Yeah.
I was hesitant going into turns, hesitant going into intersections. That at that point, I was like, this isn't an outlet anymore. This is causing stress. And so I retired the road bike after that point, and I still get out on a mountain bike and
Yeah.
from time to time and get some miles in. But that was when I did that race. It was after that I was kind of back in that square one of, okay, time to find a new purpose. I don't think this is going to be it anymore.
Yeah,
So
it's interesting. Is it's like a running back blowing their ACL and then trying to figure out as they come back how, trusting it that they can cut. I think it's interesting that you were able to realize that like sometimes the outlet that we had before, it might be doing more harm than good now, and maybe it's time to find another outlet. I know, you're a guy who gets knocked down and finds a new thing to set your sights on, and at this point cycling sort of gets taken away from you, and you set your sights on a new thing of like, hey, I'm gonna be a contractor, I'm gonna go back overseas. What makes you want to do that? And then talk us through ultimately then you have another incredible setback that you have to fight back from in that situation.
yeah, initially there were two reasons I started looking into contracting again. It was I really had to sit down and figure out when was the last time I was happy? When was the last time I was proud of what I was doing?
Yeah,
And how can I get back to that? And I really missed my time on the teams with the boys.
sure.
Deployments, they suck in some ways, but they're amazing in other ways because the stories that come out of them, the good, the bad, and the ugly,
Yep.
it makes us who we are. And I was proud of who I was when I was doing that. And
Shared hardship creates bonds that you can't find anywhere else. Whether it's
absolutely,
we're blessed to have it all the time on a team because you're constantly facing some sort of external, enemy, either figuratively or literally, that you and your team are joining together. Whether it's the elements, whether it's an actual enemy, you've got these shared hardships that's what binds us. That's a
100%.
huge deal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it was that. And then I started applying for contracts and I got picked up for one of the ones that I really wanted almost immediately.
Hmm.
So now I've got a purpose to get to train for. So that drove me back into the gym to get through. Every day I still had pain in my back and my hip from that accident, but it gave me a reason to fight through that pain and get myself strong enough that I could go past the course and meet the standards and go back overseas to be with the boys again.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was something. It gave me purpose and it drove me in the direction I wanted to go. So it was all positive things. And so I did. I went, I completed it. It took me about a year and a half to get started because I had to apply for a new clearance. And so during that time, I got a really awesome job teaching military SWAT for all branches. And they wanted to use some of my Sephardic skills to come in there and help them develop their grading curriculum, their testing and everything to make sure that they were putting quality products out.
Mhm.
And I got to be a huge part of that. And again, met some awesome guys while I was doing it. I love teaching. Like some Green Berets hate doing SWIC tours. I was sad that I never got to do a SWIC tour because I actually really enjoy teaching.
Yeah.
But which is weird. I probably lose friends for saying that. But
No, I think I think there's something. I think a lot of special forces guys, because that's part of our working with allies and partners. We may not want to go do the SWIC tour necessarily, but there's a lot of gratification in being able to see the light bulb come on for someone else in a skill that you
yes,
assisted them with. I mean, we get lucky to be able to do that in other languages and other countries. But there's something of it's of being of service to that person, whether you're coaching them, whether you're being a teacher. Like, I think most of our listeners have probably had that opportunity somewhere, whether it's as an instructor, as a parent, whatever. There's something magical about seeing someone who didn't know how to do something have the light bulb come on and realize, like, I'll never forget the first time I taught somebody how to see trace as a sniper, and just see them come off the glass and be like, oh, it's magic. There's just there's those moments where it's super cool to help somebody else become better at something that you're good at. So I don't think you'll lose any friends over that, Zach. But all right, so you're doing that and
Yep.
keep going. You're at that point.
So at that point, let's see, I did I was teaching. My clearance finally gets approved. I went through the training pipeline for my new contracting position.
Yeah.
Ended up going through with no issues and started going back overseas. And I think my first trip, I did like 90 days, came home for 60 days, went back over for 90, came home, and then I did a total of 4 trips. And
Yeah.
after that fourth one was when COVID hit. And I was overseas when COVID started becoming a thing in the US.
Yeah.
And so eventually the company said, hey, we're not sending planes over anymore. The last one is this week. If you want to go home before August, and this was in like April,
Yeah.
you need to get on that plane. And I had already been there, I think, for like 60 days. So I was ready. And I was like, I'll go home. Some guys want to stay because they're getting paid to now just sit there and watch Netflix and basically have a presence on base, and that's about it.
Yeah.
There wasn't much work getting done. So, but I wanted to get home. So I came home and everything was shutting down. So outdoor activities were approved and went out. My wife and I went kayaking.
Yeah.
And I was getting out of a dock. I had an open cut on my leg, nothing bad, but I didn't even think anything of it. But being in and out of the water was, probably not the most sanitary thing for it.
Right.
But I've never I grew up like with skinned up knees and going swimming in the creeks behind my house, so I didn't think anything of it. About 4 days later, after that trip ended, I woke up and my knee was a little bit inflamed. Like it looked like there was like a jello jiggler on top of my kneecap.
Right.
And it was red and just like a lot of fluid built up and kind of warm to the touch. And I was like, I don't think these aren't usually good symptoms. I'm gonna
I
go to
might
the
be an
urgent
echo,
care.
but yeah, it's not a good. My knee's
My
not
medic
supposed to look
once
like
told
this.
me. Yeah. So I went to the urgent care, and at this point, I was in fairly good shape. I was
Yeah.
bigger, but in a good way. I was like 250 pounds, and so the doc comes in and he looks at it. They ran some blood tests, and everything came back clean in my blood tests.
Hmm.
So he was like, "I think you just overdid it in the gym." And he's like, we're gonna give you some steroids and see how that goes. In 10 days, if it's still causing you trouble, follow up with an orthopedic doc. And I was like, all right, you're the doctor. I'm like half of an 18 echo, so I'm gonna take your advice. And I went home, and I didn't wait 10 days. 2 days later, it looked like a basketball was growing on my knee, and I called this orthopedic doc and I was like, hey, I was seen over the weekend. They told me to follow up with you. I said, it's getting worse and it's starting to get pretty concerning. Can I come see you? And he said, yeah, I should probably see you today. So I went in there and he walks in and I couldn't even get like sweatpants were the only thing I could fit over this knee.
Sure.
So I pulled my sweatpants down and he took one look at it and he just goes, get back to the hospital.
Yeah.
And he said, that's absolutely infected. I'm going to call them. And when you get there, they're going to admit you. And he said, plan to be there for probably 2 weeks. And then we'll continue IV antibiotics for the next like 6 weeks at home.
Yeah.
So at that point, it wasn't really, it was an inconvenience. It wasn't like, all these flags are going off. So I get to the hospital, they check me in, they start me on IV antibiotics immediately, get me comfortable, and then just watch it. And after we did that for about 4 days, and then after 4 days, you could still see from the discoloration that it was still spreading. And they decided they wanted to go in and do an exploratory incision just to see what it looks like underneath the surface. So they knocked me out. They make like a little 2-inch incision over my kneecap. And they said it looked like dirty dishwasher fluid just started pouring out of my leg. So they stopped, they packed it, they woke me up, they told me what was going on, and they said, tomorrow we're going to do surgery again. This time we're going to open up all of your leg and scrub it out.
Don't worry, I've had one of my legs open already in the past. I'm old hat at this. Just go ahead and make another 2-foot gouge, and let's get this thing going. Yeah.
So they made multiple incisions on my leg, and the doctor would stick his hand and arm in between the skin and the muscle and just scrape out all the necrotic tissue,
Oof.
wash it all out, scrub it, and then they'd wake me back up. And that had to happen every other day for
Mm.
like the next 2 months. And so every other day it was anesthesia, getting knocked out, waking up, tremendous pain from this surgery, and then lay in bed, don't move for the next day, then rinse and repeat. We thought so. What we eventually found out was when they gave me those steroids in the urgent care, it fed the bacteria and it made it super resilient
Yeah.
to antibiotics. So even my bacteria is resilient, and so it wasn't responding to the antibiotics. So they had to just keep doing these washout and debridements and scraping it out while doing the antibiotics in hopes that eventually it would get under control enough that the antibiotics could finish the job.
Sure.
We eventually got to where we thought that was happening. So they closed my leg up because they just left it open in between surgeries. There's no, if they know they're going in 2 days, there's no point in closing it. They just basically cover it and wrap it and leave it. So they finally close my leg up. I get discharged from the hospital. We don't know what the long-term effects of all this are going to be yet, but at this point, I'm just trying to stay healthy.
Yeah.
I was out for a couple weeks, 3 weeks maybe, and I woke up one morning and I got out of bed to go to the bathroom and I couldn't walk. I mean, I could move my legs, but it was so painful. I had to just sit down on the ground and slide myself to the bathroom to get to the toilet to use the bathroom. And I was like, I have no clue what's going on. I called my former 18, well, he's not my former 18 Delta, but an 18 Delta from 7th group that I knew, and said, hey, can you come look at me and figure out why I'm having so much pain in my pelvis and my hips? So he came over and he's like, I don't know what's going on. And I was like, okay, can you take me back to the hospital? And he's like, I'm not even moving you. They sent an ambulance to the house. They loaded me up, took me back there. They do all sorts of tests. And what we found out was the infection had spread into my bloodstream and then it got into my bones.
Yeah.
And was eating my pelvis, but then it also got into my heart and was building up vegetation around my aortic valve.
Wow.
So at this point, I'm still in Florida, and the hospital that I was at said, hey, you're beyond our care.
Yeah.
So we need to move you somewhere. And the VA, who is what I was using for healthcare at the time, said we're not going to send him anywhere else. So their plan was to send me to a nursing home.
Wow.
At 35 years old. Yeah. So we started, luckily we're now in an age where social media is a thing, and we use that to our advantage and basically put this out there for the world that, like, hey, the VA is trying to send a 35-year-old guy to a nursing home to basically die.
Yeah.
And I had some friends reach out that knew of a nonprofit organization, and they called and said, hey, we've got the best of the best doctors standing by in Boston. We've got a private jet to fly you up there. Awesome. We're going to get you up there and see what we can do. So yeah, I checked out of the hospital, went home for a night. My wife and I packed bags and we got on a plane and flew up to Boston. And they realized once I got up there that I had also developed really bad pneumonia. So they put me in the ICU. They ended up sticking a tube down and sucking all the gunk out of my lungs, and then kept me there for a little bit. And we were still doing some surgeries to clean up the leg. And one morning I woke up from surgery. I had been upgraded out of the ICU at this point to a regular floor. I had surgery the night before, woke up in the morning, and I got out of bed. And as soon as I stood up, the left side of my body just went completely numb and I couldn't move anything.
Yeah.
And then the lights went out and I was blind. I couldn't see. So I sat back on the bed. I found the little remote control and paged the nurse. And she came in. I was like, I have no clue what's going on. They immediately sent me down for an MRI, and they found out that in the last 24 hours, I had 2 strokes. So one while I was sleeping,
Yeah,
and then one probably when I stood up out of bed that day is when it happened. So back to the ICU, and then
in that moment right there, Zach, you just keep getting hit, right? It just keeps on coming, right? Every time you're like, all right, this is the worst part of this story. Nope, hold on, we got something else. At that point that day, when one side of your body goes numb and then you go blind, what are you thinking at that point? Like, are you ever at what's keeping you going at that point? Or is it just in so much of a survival mode that you don't even really have a chance to like think about what's happening? But at some point, it's got to be like, man, what is going?
yeah.
Is this it for Zach? Like what is going on here?
This was kind of a turning point. I tried to stay positive
Sure.
throughout, and when that happened, I think that's where I showed that I'm human.
Yeah.
And I honestly I gave up.
Yeah.
And it got to the point while I was laying in the hospital for the next couple of weeks, every night. I'm not a religious person, but I started praying, but I wasn't praying for the right reasons. I was praying that I wouldn't wake up tomorrow. That, hey, I've made my peace. I'm ready. I'm ready to stop fighting. I don't have any fight left. And yeah, that's where I was at that point. But then I kept waking up every day. Yeah. And eventually, at first I was like disappointed that I woke up like, shit, I got to go through this again today.
Yeah.
And eventually you get sick of being let down. You're hoping that this is the end of the suffering, but eventually you realize it's not. And so it's time to start going to work.
Yeah.
And because of the events that happened previously with the accident, getting out of the military, I knew I needed to find a purpose again.
Yeah.
So I just started looking for that next purpose. And it was a purpose that I never saw myself in. And that's doing this with you, Matt, with coming and speaking and sharing my story. I had a lot of people throughout, like after the car accident and while I was in the hospital, I had some amazing friends that came and would visit me in the hospital, keep me company, go out, get me food so I didn't have to eat food from the cafeteria 3 times a day.
Absolutely.
And like just sit there and talk with me, even if I was like barely coherent because of the meds, and I would like talk for 10 minutes and then fall asleep for 2 hours. They were just there. They were just there, and they just wanted me to know they were there. And there were people that I respected tremendously. And like, they kept telling me, Zach, you're so fucking resilient. Yeah. And I was like, I don't know what that means, but I respect you. And so if you say that I am it, then I'm going to look into what it means and try to start figuring it out. And so, yeah, my new purpose was to figure out what made me resilient so that I could share that in hopes of making it easier for the next person.
Yeah, it's phenomenal. I mean, it's tough to walk through all of those things of, man, this just, again, just keeps piling on these different things. But I think it's led you to a point now where, what do you say to those folks who are maybe not exactly in that situation, but we all face difficulties. The hardest thing you've ever done in your life is the hardest thing you've ever done in your life. The worst situation you've ever faced in your life is the worst situation you've ever felt. Doesn't matter whether it's, 2 years of 30 surgeries or whether it's whatever you're going through right now as a listener. What do you say to those folks? How do you how do you synthesize these multiple years of having to get knocked down and get back up? What do you say to those folks?
So I'm going to preface this with I'm still going through this
Yeah,
process.
that's
I'm
great.
still I'm still having surgeries. My last one was about 4 months ago. Now the infection's gone. I'm healthy. I'm healthier than I've been in a couple years, but
Yeah,
it's cleaning up the
sure.
third party effects of having all those surgeries.
Yeah,
So I'm still figuring it out, and I will probably add to this list. But right now, I've got to narrow down to three main things that really contributed to my resilience. Number one, we've already talked about, and that's find a purpose.
yeah,
Because you got to have something to work towards. You got to have some goal. So finding that purpose. Number two is the people you surround yourself with.
yeah.
If you surround yourself by the right people, you don't only get the traits that they have, but you also have those people in your network now to help you when you need them. And then number three is stepping out of your comfort zone. If
Mm.
you can get comfortable being uncomfortable, then when the surprises happen, you're going to be a lot more cool, calm, and collected as you go through it.
Yeah, it's
So
phenomenal. Yeah, absolutely.
the those are my three main things that I think have majorly contributed. But you have to be willing to do the work. You can't just say, all right, I'm going to just take anyone in my life and I have all these people now to surround me. You got to figure out, and it's a hard process sometimes, but you got to figure out who is draining you and who is charging you, who's helping push you in the direction you want to go and who's keeping you from it. And you got to be willing to cut those ties. Stepping out of your comfort zone, that's not something we want to do. I'll say for me speaking, even when it's on this with, telecommunication with
Sure.
Zoom, and I still get nervous talking
Yeah,
before we start. Getting up in front of people, I get 10 times more nervous.
sure.
And so it's stepping out of your comfort zone. People kept coming to me and saying, you have a message. We'd really love for you to come share it with this group. I hired a speaking coach and I work with her, and I go to a class once a month where all these random people are in there and we get past topics and we have to get up and speak in front of them, and then they give us feedback. Those are ways that I step out of my comfort zone. And then it's also the gym. Once I got healthy enough that I could go back to the gym, I was embarrassed to go to the gym. I was a Green Beret. I was 250 pounds. I was strong as hell. Now the left side of my body super weak.
Yeah.
It looks totally different. I didn't wear shorts or short sleeves in public for a year because I didn't like how I looked. But I stepped out of my comfort zone. I joined a gym. I'm now starting to put together coaching for that gym.
Yeah.
And that just builds, it's a deposit in that resiliency bank account so that when I need it, it's there for me.
No, it's a phenomenal point. I think all of those things, one of the most critical parts of it is to not wait until the storm to then try to find all this resilience, right? Exactly what you just said. You're putting pennies in that penny bank by getting yourself outside of your comfort zone, making your mind and your body be used to being adaptable. It's the same thing we do for physically working out. You make sure
Yeah.
you push your body's limits, you make it uncomfortable, and that's how you get growth. It's the same way, whether it's your relationships, whether it's psychologically, cognitively, spiritually, as you push yourself out of your comfort zone and you work those muscles, they're more prepared for when you need them in the future. I think it's phenomenal advice, and I really do think you do have a phenomenal story of, there's like two or three different points in there where like, hey, this section of your life would just be the huge resiliency story, but you're a guy who's continued to get those, again, those opportunities to show that resilience. And I think you're doing a great job of stepping outside of your comfort zone and finding ways to talk to others. I mean, we build our own sort of mental thought process and preparation off of learning from others in a lot of ways. And that's one of the things that we want to provide on this podcast is the opportunity for people to hear from others and how they have prepared themselves and stepped out of their comfort zone and surrounded themselves with the right people and found purpose so that they are, ready to achieve great things, but also ready to come back from, life knocking them down. It's going to happen to all of us in different ways and different fashions. But I think it's a phenomenal story, man. I thank you so much for sharing it with us. I want to turn it over to you as we've, you just wrapped it up in a beautiful bow, but I want to turn it over to you one more time. Just if there's anything else that you'd like as sort of a closing parting shot for the audience, is there anything else kind of closing comments that you'd like to say?
I want to do one shout out real quick.
Yeah.
Because I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for them.
Yeah.
And we didn't really have the opportunity because we were telling the story and talking about it from my perspective, but my family.
Yeah.
Family is another huge piece, and they fall into that category of who you surround yourself with.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And like, I know what my experience of going through all that was like. I was lucky enough, though. I say this in a joking, not even really a joking way, but I was lucky enough that I was in and out of surgery and I was on a ton of meds to make sure that I didn't really know the full capacity of what was going on.
Yeah.
But my wife wasn't.
Yeah.
Instead, she was getting phone calls saying, "Hey, we don't know if he's going to make it through the night. You should get on an emergency flight up to Boston from Florida if you want to see him." Multiple times. My daughter was 14 and 15 years old when all this was going on. I can't imagine what that was like for them. And the fact that they are still my family shows that they are resilient as well. So I just wanted to do a quick shout out to them for that.
No, it's phenomenal, man. And honestly, it's amazing testament to their, as you said, their resilience, but also it's phenomenal now that you've been able to come out of it on the other side, and now you all can spend more time together. I know as we've talked over the last couple of months, like you've been able to take that time and be able to spend time with your family now. And, what a blessing it is to come out on the other side of those things and be able to, reap the benefits of now all this resilience. So, again, Zach, I can't thank you enough for being willing to walk us through your story and for the resilience you've shown in multiple different capacities. And I appreciate you being, you wanting to give back to others and make sure that they are prepared when unfortunately life hits them as well. So again, man, thanks for joining us on the show, and thanks for being willing to walk through your story.
Absolutely, Matt. Thanks for having me.
All right. And hey, all of you out there that are listening or watching it on YouTube, thank you for listening to another episode of Softcast. We're excited here in season 4 to have some phenomenal guests like Zach today and some of the others that we've released. We hope that you have already subscribed, but if you haven't, go down and subscribe to the show right now. If you found this valuable, as I know you probably did, I want you to think of someone in your circle or on your team who you think might be able to benefit from it as well, and share this episode with them. Send them a link on whatever your favorite platform is. Go down and give us a 5-star review or a thumbs up on YouTube as well. It helps other people find the show. And make sure you're following US SOCOM on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, or LinkedIn. And finally, if you got any feedback for the show, we really do take it seriously. We've had multiple guests that are a result of email feedback or comments on social media. Feel free to reach out and send us an email, softcast@socom.mil. So on behalf of General Fenton, all of us here at US SOCOM, thanks to Zach today, and thank you for listening to another episode of Softcast.